Hey, this is Senator Justin Reedy coming to you at the end of week 2 of the 2025 General Assembly session. The big news this week is that Governor Moore released his proposed FY 2026 budget. And as you all know from watching previous videos and hearing the news, our state's facing a projected $3 billion deficit for the coming year. And beyond that, in years after, it continues and even gets bigger. We know what's driving this. It's spending that Maryland committed to over the course of several years that when Governor Moore took over did not reverse, did not try to change. It's spending that the General Assembly committed us to, the Democratic gerrymandered supermajority. They passed the Kirwan Blueprint for Education, committing the state to tens of billions of dollars in spending over the course of 10 years. That spending only just started really in the last year or two. And Governor Hogan, of course, at the time vetoed the bill. I fought it and voted against it, but the Democrats overrode his veto. And that's one of the main drivers. Maryland has one of the most generous packages for people on Medicaid. We even give Medicaid coverage, taxpayer-funded coverage, to families of 3 or 4 making up to $100,000 a year. Medicaid is supposed to be for those who are, at the poverty line or maybe slightly above, and for vulnerable adults and seniors. It's not supposed to be for people who can afford to pay insurance, at least to some extent on their own. So those are examples of those costs have started to rise more and more. So even though the last 2 years the state's passed a budget that wasn't really any bigger on paper, these commitments to spending are now coming due. And our state's revenues have been basically stagnant, which means really they're dropping because Maryland has also passed a whole lot of bad policies as it relates to businesses and job creation. And people have left our state. We've lost nearly 40,000 people in the last year. And the only people we've gained to replace them are basically, a lot of cases, illegal immigrants or people who are here transiently for different reasons. So we're losing revenue because we have a bad economic policy. Governor Moore's response to that was to say we do need to cut spending. And he also has said, before he introduced his budget, that we had a very high bar for raising taxes and that we needed to stimulate economic growth. Well, all of that sounded pretty good. But he's rolled out his budget, and it does contain some cuts, cuts to the rate of increase of spending anyway. It's about $2 billion he's identified as things that they're cutting out of the budget to try to get to that $3 billion. Unfortunately, it's a $3 billion deficit, as I said last week. And so he's now rolled out several things that will raise taxes, fees, and costs for working families and Marylanders. He has got a couple of little things in there so he can say he's cutting taxes. But as I'll lay out for you here very briefly, that even the taxes he is quote unquote cutting, a lot of times that money's coming out other places. So it's not really going to benefit. He's cutting the corporate tax very slightly, which is something I supported, cutting the corporate tax in Maryland. We have a very high corporate tax. But while he's making a 0.25% cut in that, he's going to raise taxes on people, income taxes on people making $500,000 or more a year. And because he says those are people who are doing well and can afford it. Well, 2 things. One is, if your concern is economic growth and development, a lot of times the people making the $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 a year are the ones who also have a small business and they're an S Corp or an LLC and they're being paid and they're reinvesting a lot of that money into their business. But also, people who make several $100,000 a year can very easily relocate and go to another state. And we saw that about 20 years ago, less than 20 years ago, Maryland passed a millionaire's tax and then literally lost a couple $100 million in revenue instead of gaining what they thought would be hundreds of millions of dollars. So he's doing that. He's adding a 75-cent fee in his proposal onto every Amazon or Walmart online transaction that you have, doubling the car emissions fee, trying to get rid of, trying to penalize people who want to pay their car registration annually instead of every 2 years so they can break it up, and a number of other issues. And we're going to lay a lot of that out in my email update that this video is a part of. So I've been clear from the very beginning. We do not need to balance the budget on the backs of working families and businesses and retirees. People cannot afford to have taxes and fees go up and higher cost of living. It's not good. It's not the easiest thing in the world to cut out spending sometimes. It's hard for Annapolis politicians to look at special interest and say no. And obviously, it was too hard for the governor to just find another $1 billion of cuts and changes. But we need to do that. That's what we need to do. That's going to be my primary goal this session as it relates to this issue of the budget and taxes. Is I oppose tax increases and fee increases. In the last 2 years alone, Maryland has increased taxes and fees, 338 of them under Governor Moore. We can't afford anymore. It's not we do not have a revenue problem. We have a spending problem in Maryland. And so I'm going to continue working on that. Look forward to updating you more later on other issues, but that's the big news of the week. Please feel free to reach out to me anytime, and thank you very much.